whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Mike. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Thank you for joining us today. This is our fourth webinar for the course Fundraising for Collections Care. Today's webinar is Making the Case, Writing Successful Proposal. And it's so nice to see so many of you from all over. It looks like right now we have about 106 folks logged in, and that number is slowly creeping. Please feel free to continue to say hello in the chat box to the left. And throughout this webinar, please feel free to post your questions there as well. As Mike said, we'll hold on to them and ask them during breaks and at the end. And if we aren't able to get to them all in this session, we'll make sure to hold on to them and get them answered offline. So as you guys know, this is just one course in our series, Caring for Yesterday's Treasures Today. 5 courses have already been archived on the online community and are available for viewing. This series really would not have been possible without support from a Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, so we're extremely thankful to them. And we're also really fortunate to have Learning Times on board, as well as Mike for this project for website and webinar support. As I just said, this is the 4th webinar in this 5-webinar course, and if you can believe it, we'll meet one more time on Monday, October 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and then we're like our other courses, you're more than welcome to earn a certificate of completion and a digital credential from Credly.com for participating. To do that, we just ask that you have already registered so we can email you. We ask that you've watched all 5 webinars in the course, and you should be receiving recordings. So if you're unable to join us live, you're welcome to keep up with the course with those recordings. And then finally, to complete all 5 homework assignments no later than Monday, October 14th. As of yesterday, we had about 81 folks who had completed the homework assignment for our last webinar with Kelsey, and there wasn't a lot of turnaround time, so I'm still really pleased with that number. We asked you about your organization's membership program, and it did look like most of you had a program in place, but they did vary quite a bit. But there were some of you that did not have a current membership plan in place, and I actually want to steal one of those responses, and I hope you don't mind, but I think it illustrates so well why a membership program can be so helpful. One of you had mentioned that you had personally joined the Museum of the Moving Image, and about that membership you said, we get wonderful benefits and feel good about supporting the institution. In addition to increasing our attendance, I also do feel that our membership has deepened our appreciation of their collections and helped them grow attendance, as we frequently spread the word and invite friends to join us there. We feel likely to give a little more when we renew next year, and isn't that exactly what we all want to hear from our members? So just a really great example of the impact that a membership program can have. And we also ask you to do a little research on donor software and choose one that you preferred. As you can see, these are your responses. Anything that got more than one hit is thrown in here. And Donor Perfect is clearly the winner, and you guys all had some great reasons for choosing it. So thank you to everyone who already submitted that homework assignment and all the assignments so far, and I look forward to seeing more by October 14th. Just a reminder that the course web page is where you'll find everything for this course, everything you need. So the resources, the PowerPoints, and the links to the homework, and also transcripts. And the transcript is now up for Kelsey's course. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to email us or call us. And now, without further delay, I'd love to introduce to you all Barbara Lilly, who is our instructor today. Barbara is currently the Program Officer for the New York State Program for the Conservation and Preservation of Library Research Materials at the New York State Library, which provides over $2 million in grants for the preservation of mainly paper-based materials. She also provides consultant services regarding preservation throughout the state, and Barbara is also the state aid coordinator for approximately $90 million in state aid to libraries and library systems. Barbara, thank you so much for joining us today. I am going to go ahead and move this PowerPoint out of the way, and you should see yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Jenny.
There you go.
Hello, everybody. I don't know if they told you this is my very first time doing a webinar, and I've been super nervous. And Jenny and Lori have been so great. So thank you guys for sort of holding my hand through this. So today I'm going to talk about writing a proposal. And I talked with Susan a little bit beforehand, and I'm going to focus a little bit more on government type of proposals as opposed to going to private foundations. And so hopefully we won't have too much overlap today. But, and again, feel free to send questions at any time to me. And I will, let's see, I don't want to hit fast forward, do I, Jenny? It's not moving.
Sorry, Barbara. So the bottom left hand, you'll see 2 arrows.
Right.
And then you should just be able to click on them.
I'm seeing 4 arrows. That's my problem.
Uh-oh.
Oh, I see. Okay, there we go, I think. Nope.
Here, let me pull your PowerPoint up a little bit.
Oh, there it is. Okay, now I see it. Okay, so here we go. And this is supposed to be a chicken, but it's really a duck that I tried very hard to try to find an image. So the first step you have to do, of course, is to define your project. You've decided that you are wanting to do a preservation project and you feel you're ready for it. And that's a whole other topic, I think, but we'll talk about a little bit is, are you ready to actually go forward and write a proposal and get a grant? And so the question I come up with against a lot of folks sometimes is, where do you start? Do you start with the vendor or do you start with what you want to do? And it's a tough question, and I think the answer is a little bit of both. But you really want to think about what it is that you feel you need to do for your collections. If you're just getting started, you might think we need a survey, or you may have something very specific in mind that you want to do. And then, of course, you have to find who's going to fund that for you, which other people have already talked to you about. But you want to stay true to define your project. I would say, don't just apply for a grant because someone is offering money. No grant is, I say to people sometimes, it's not free money. Grants are not free money. They cost you money as well, and those of you who have done grants will know that. And then look and see, have you had any surveys or do you have a preservation plan? That's a really good place to start, and it's something that gives you a lot of credibility with funders. I've had people come in and say, oh, we want to do conservation of these 3 volumes. And my response to them is, well, what else do you have in your collections? Why are you focusing on expensive treatment of 3 volumes? How has that become your number 1 priority? So I would say if you haven't had a survey, apply for a survey. And there are a lot of survey funding out there. In New York State, we fund surveys, but IMLS funds surveys, NEH funds surveys. Some of the regional conservation centers have subsidized surveys. They're not expensive to do, and I think that they are worth every bit of time and effort that you put into having a survey done. So that's where I would suggest you start. I think we have a poll question here, Lori. There we go. So I kind of wanted to know if how many of you have had experience? Oh, cool. It's so I'm talking to a vacuum, so it's nice to see a response here coming through. All right. So not a lot of you have had a ton of experience, but kind of between. Okay. Still coming in. All right. So almost half of you have never written a grant proposal before. Okay, that's good for me to know. So I'm going to move on. So the first thing, once you've identified your funder, and I'll talk about that in the next screen a little bit too. I kind of, again, it's this chicken and egg thing that I was trying to work out. You need to understand the application process. Most funders, I think, now have gone to an online application, and there may be some work that you need to do to get into their system. And you want to do that as soon as possible, even if you haven't decided to write the proposal yet, because it may get you sort of into their information loop. Some folks want to have a letter of intent first, So you really want to find out what you need to do. If you need to sort of put a placeholder in, even if you haven't decided for sure, you want to get that in place. You want to understand what their deadlines are. Make sure that you know when things are due. Um, it changes. Just because you applied last year doesn't mean the process is the same this year. So I would say make sure you go on and you get onto their web page first and then move through all of their information so you understand exactly what it is they want you to do. I know for us this year, we've suddenly been handed a whole bunch of new rules and regulations for New York State that I'm still trying to work out, and I'm trying to let people know, oh, just because you applied last year, you now have to do some additional paperwork with us. And I think that's pretty much true of a lot of governments. Then you want to understand the review and notification process. Um, you may not, um, I'm sorry, I'm looking at that and thinking for a second. Um, you, you may have a date in which you have to apply for, and then sometimes they'll tell you, oh, you're going to hear back from us in a specific date or time period. You really need to know that when you're planning your project. It's going to affect your timeline very much. And then you want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row in your institution. And by that, I mean you have to go through the channels. If you're working in an institution, most likely you're going to have to get approval within your institution to apply for a grant. Sometimes you may be have other parts of your institution that are also wanting to go to this grantor for a proposal, and that may be okay with them, it may not be, and you need to make sure you know that because you don't want to find out that you're sent in 2 applications and they only allow 1 application per institution in each round of grant applications. So you really need to find out that before you really put a lot of work into the project. And then the one thing I say to people, and I'll say over and over again, is please read the application thoroughly from start to finish before you even start. Make sure you understand exactly what you have to do to apply. You know, I know that for grants.gov, there's a lot of information you have to give. We do too. So please make sure that you do that. Okay, I see you have a question about a survey. That's a great question. And one of my polling questions we're going to get to is people's background in preservation. There are what we call preservation surveys, and if you've ever had like a needs assessment for an archive, it's different. A preservation survey is usually hiring someone to come in for maybe a day or more, and they're going to look at, it's not an item level survey of your collection. It's looking at where your collections are stored, how they're stored, what kind of materials you have in your collection, what's your building structure, what's your security arrangements, what's the temperature and humidity in your building, what's the environment in which your materials are being stored. And they make recommendations on those things, and we'll often have an executive summary in the beginning that sort of sets some priorities for you. So it's a really great way to look at what you can do to preserve your collection. And a lot of things in these surveys are things, reports, you don't need to apply for a grant for. They may be some really just simple things you can do, like turn off the lights when you leave at night or when no one's in a room. Don't be turning your air conditioning off on the weekends during the summer. Some very, putting in ultraviolet sleeves on your window. So it's a really good place to start. And I know for our grant program, if you've had a survey, we ask you to attach that to the application or at least executive summary because we're going to look at that and say, what kind of progress have they made on addressing these preservation issues, and what are they asking for, and where does that fall into what the survey consultant recommended? Sometimes you may have a survey, if you've already done something like that, where you're really looking specifically at a collection, and you may be doing more of a random sample or an item level, but that usually comes after a general preservation survey. And from that survey, you can create a preservation plan for your organization. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, so you're going to read through and you're going to really understand what it is that the grantor is asking for. Okay, oh, here's my question. So, do you have training or experience in preservation? That was the other question I sort of wanted to know. I love this. like watching the presidential elections things come in. Oh, so we're almost split as far as experience. Okay, that's good to know. Okay. Well, that's good. I'll remember to write that. So a survey is different from an assessment. A preservation survey is not looking at, a little bit they'll look at your cataloging and maybe finding aids. And sometimes they do recommend, oh, you really need to, do an inventory before you start preservation. So that's good to know because that's one of the things a lot of vendors, grantors, I'm going to keep saying vendors, ask for. So before you begin to write, you're going to want to call the grantor. And I think just about everyone I've ever worked with, either applying for grants, has been open to this. Sometimes I know that IMLS has had forums where something like this, like a webinar where you sign up and they'll take questions and walk people through the application. I know in my case I do grant writing workshops because I'm only in one state. But most folks really do welcome calls, and it's really simple. There's usually a person who's listed as the program manager, and just send them an email and say, I have questions. Do you mind if I send them to you, or if we set up a time to talk on the phone? And they'll let you know. When you call, try to have more than one project to discuss. We're still in the sort of the chicken and the egg phase, and you want to figure out what you can apply for. And so if you have a couple things in mind, if you start to talk about one and they say, oh no, we don't fund anything like that, okay, so maybe there's something else that they do fund that you could talk to them about, or maybe you just need to call them back another day. But be flexible when you call them, and if you're really set on doing one thing and they say no, that's your decision, but listen to what they have to say, and maybe there is a way you can make your project work. You might decide at this point that you're not ready to apply for a grant in this current round. And that's not an uncommon thing. You may feel that you're not ready. You're asking me to press 5 during the break. Krishna, you can please. Okay, I'm not talking loud enough. I'll work on that. Okay. So you might decide that you're not ready to apply for a grant. You may need to wait for the next round. And I have people who come to my workshops and say, oh my gosh, we're totally not ready for that. And that's great if you realize that, because it means you're going to make a list of what you need to do to get ready to apply the next time so that you do have a successful application. Another thing you want to ask them is, where is this money coming from? Is it, in my case, my funds are state funds. People sometimes they assume they're federal funds. But that may they may give you a sense of what restrictions there are. So it's good to know, am I applying for a program that's federal money? Maybe you just know already, or is it somebody is doing a re-grant program? We have some different things. We were talking before this with Lori Foley, and Heritage Preservation does some re-granting. They get IMLS grants, and then they manage them. So that may affect how the grant is managed, and you need to know that. There may be some restrictions on one type of grant that they're offering that they don't have on another because the funding source is different. So it's another thing you just kind of want to have a sense of and talk to them about. The next thing I want to talk about then is you've decided to go ahead and do a project. So you get to the point where you're designing your project. So you need to create a plan. And there are several different things, and those of you who did the homework and saw ours, we have very specific questions we're asking. Now, some of those questions we ask are really general questions about the institution, and then we ask some very specific questions. So you need to know what it is you want to do, and you need to generate, the first thing you want to do is start working on a timeline. You'll find out from looking at the website, is this a 6-month grant, 3 years, 1 year? You really know to do that. I'm going to try hitting 5 since people can't hear me. Is that helping, I hope? So you generate a plan. You start on your timeline to figure out what it is you need to get, what you want to get done. You're asking for the grantor for certain funds to do something, but that may be just part of the overall project. So you may need to describe the overall project, and that may be that the part that they're funding is 3 months, but the overall project is 18 months. So you need to kind of figure that out ahead of time so that you can really address all the different parts and issues of your project. You also need to define your need. Why is it that you're applying for a grant? I have a lot of folks that will apply, and they'll talk very eloquently about the importance of their collection, and they can't tell me, though, why they need preservation. What's wrong with your collection that you need money for it? So they'll tell me how great it is, how many people use it, what's it about, but I don't get a sense of and then they'll talk about what they're going to do, but I can't pull it together. Why do they feel they need to treat this collection? They don't say that the paper's brittle or it's torn, maybe they're maps that are rolled up and dirty, but you really want to give a physical description of your collection in preservation grants as well as an intellectual description of your collection. You want to try to do both. So you're defining that need. Then you need to identify your costs. And again, this is your entire project cost. It's not just what you're asking the grantor for, but you need to be very, very clear what things you're going to pay for and what you're asking the grantor to pay for. And I always say, when you get to this part of the application, details, lots of details are really important. So if you're doing a project in which you're going to maybe have conservation treatment of a collection of 50 maps, and you're asking the grantor to pay for that treatment, but at the same time, you are going to create a catalog record or a finding aid for these maps, but you're going to pay for that. You still want to talk about that because that really strengthens your proposal because it's showing that you're making the collection more accessible, but you're paying for that. But you want to talk about when is that going to happen, who's going to do it. So you're talking then also about outcomes. Everybody is very focused on outcome-based evaluation. If you haven't run against that yet, go to ILMLS's webpage, and they have lots of information about what we call OBE. So that's really important to know that. So you want to say, the final outcome of this project is that we're going to have these maps. They're going to be conserved. Maybe they're going to be Mylar encapsulated. They're going to be rehoused, and they're going to have additional cataloging. So now researchers can actually use them because right now we're not even sure what we have, and they're not usable. You also want to identify the roles. Who's responsible for what in the project? If you have staff who are going to be involved in the project, you need to name them, and you probably are going to need to include their resumes as part of your application. And then if you're going to hire vendors or consultants, again, you need to name them and talk about who's going to do what. Make that very clear. Often in the budget, you're showing all of those people. And I always say to people, anything that's in your budget should be explained in your narrative. If I see an expense in the budget and I haven't seen it in the narrative, and they're asking me to pay for it, our program to pay for it, I'm not going to because I don't really know what it's for. So it's really something you want to work through. Who's doing what? What are their roles? And again, if you're doing stuff that's part of your sort of institutional contribution to the program, you want to include that. Again, we're talking about identifying staff involved in the project, who's going to do this. Make sure they know that they're going to do this. I worked at an institution once where I was hired, and right after I got there, we got told we were awarded a grant. And some of the staff didn't even know that they had been put down as doing part of the project for that. So it's something you need to make sure your staff know as well. And that there's institutional commitment for that. Depending on the size of your institution, it might not be such a big deal. If you're from a smaller institution, you may be doing a lot of it. Outside vendors and consultants, very important that you reach out and you identify who's going to be your vendors or your consultants, anyone that you're hiring for the project. I tell people if you're going to be hiring temporary staff and you don't know yet, make sure that you have a nice detailed job description that you can include as well. So again, it's clear to everyone what you're asking these people, what you're going to have them do for this project. Okay, so you have to find vendors and consultants, and this is tough sometimes. If you've never written a preservation proposal before and you're not sort of in the preservation business, it's hard to find them. You want to make sure, first of all, that you find someone qualified. So there are a couple things that you can do. There are things like, and I think part of my other document I sent in was things like the American Institute of Conservators has a Find a Conservator site where you can put in your geographic location, and you can find folks like that. You can also look at past awards that the granting institution has given. So one of the things I know in our online system is we allow folks to search by subject area, and they can see grants that we funded in the past. So if you're thinking of doing a photograph project, you can put those terms in, and it'll give you a list of every project we've ever funded that had to deal with photographs. It tells you who got the grant, when, the dollar amount, and who was the project manager, and their, I think, phone number or email. Not everybody does it that detailed, but you can see, look back at past years of who received a grant award. And if you see a project that sounds similar to yours, see if you can give the project manager a call and just ask them if they're willing to chat with you a few minutes about vendors or consultants that they use. Most people are more than happy to do that. You might have colleagues that you can call. People call me sometimes. Not everybody has lists of vendors or consultants because that's a whole vetting process that we don't really want to go through. But you could ask them if they can tell you names of, what I say is I can tell you names of other folks who've been on projects that were funded and were deemed qualified. Most grantors are looking for the most qualified consultants or vendors. So then you want to also get references for these vendors and consultants, and be sure to call those references and have a series of questions. And one of the things you might want to ask them is, were there any problems during the project, and how did they handle those problems? It's not unusual to sometimes have the project not go exactly as you planned. So how did everyone deal with that? How did did they get back to you quickly? How did they handle any errors in their work? Did they give you all the documentation that you asked for? All of those kinds of things you would want to do or to know. And you want to get bids. Now, we require people to get at least 2 bids. And when I first took over my program, that wasn't a requirement. But I started to require it because I was seeing bids that came in that were wildly different in prices. And you really want to make sure that you give the same information to each person who might put in a bid so that you can compare the cost. You might also be comparing their treatment proposals. If you're looking to have a conservation grant, a conservation grant to do treatment, the conservator is going to should be giving you a very detailed treatment proposal, so you know exactly what they're going to do to your collection. For some things like microfilming or digitization, there are national standards or best practices. I get asked a lot the question, well, if I'm writing a preservation grant, do I need to know anything about preservation? And my answer is yes, you do. You need to know something, and that's often why that survey is so important in the beginning, because the survey is really a great way to start to educate you about preservation. You can't count on your vendor to tell you what you need to do entirely. You need to have some idea and of what your collection needs, and you need to understand some of the terms that they're using. So, and again, there are lots of information out there that you can. One of the things I gave you was the websites, I think, for NEDCC and CCHA. They have lots of great information on their websites about these topics, and so you can at least start to learn the terminology and understand when you get a proposal what it is they're actually saying they're going to do. So get those things, and then make sure you get the good treatment proposals and that everything is there. One of the things I like people to do when they're applying is to send me some before pictures of treatment, and then, or even rehousing projects, and then to see the after, and then when you do a final report, send those after. And that, you make your before photos look as pathetic as possible, so it looks like, oh, your collection is really, really in dire need of help. So you're trying to make your case there again. So you've done all that. You've got your group together. You've got your idea. You've been talking to your vendors. You've read you read the guidelines, and you feel like you're ready to write your proposal. And then a lot of people will ask me, well, should I hire a grant writer? And I can't really answer that question for people, but my experience is most people write their own, and they do a really good job. So even if you don't have a grant writer on staff, and most people don't, there are firms out there that do it, and you can certainly talk to them. I would probably want them to have experience in at least somewhere in the cultural community of writing proposals, and not folks that are usually writing grants for, say, education or medical type topics. You'd want somebody who's used to working in a cultural repository of some sort. But I think, most people can do it yourself. So the first thing you want to do is assemble a team. It's probably going to be some of the folks who are going to be working on the project, and maybe others. Maybe they're not going to work on the project, but you need their input in order to write your proposal. And then I'll say it again, you want to read your application and guidelines again, just so that you understand what it is you're going to have to do. One of the most important things you need to do is follow the application format. I have people sometimes, in our grant application, our online, we allow people to write it in Word and copy and paste it into our system, so that it's a little easier to sometimes work as a group and you work offline. But they'll just upload the whole thing into the first section. And if you did the homework and you looked at the reviewer page, you see that most reviewers are asking to go forward, and they're asking you to follow a certain format, and they're asking the reviewers to evaluate on each section of your proposal. So you want your reviewers to find the information they're looking for when they're scoring where they expect it to be. The last thing you want to do is annoy a reviewer. And I've seen people do that, and I've had it happen to me as reviewing. You don't want to have it hard to find. You also, it's very, the thing when you're writing this is you want a lot of detail, but you don't want a lot of words. So that's something you're going to have to be balancing at all times. I remember years ago being on a panel for an NEH group of applications, and some of these were coming in at 200 pages. And the first thing we said when we got to the panel was, oh my God, 200 pages. Were these people trying to torture us or what? So think about that as well. If the grant specs don't ask for photos, but they allow you to upload them, I would go ahead and do it. Again, you can call them and ask them. I know our application is very clear what formats we allow things to be uploaded in, and we do allow photos. We do allow JPEG images. We do allow Excel sheets. We allow you to just upload those as appendices. So I would check with the grantor and make sure. But I think that's often something we really, most grantors like, and then the afters, because sometimes we're trying to do a little advocacy for our program internally, and having those photos is really great for us internally as well. The next thing you want to make sure is that you understand what expenses are fundable. I've had people send in proposals where I thought, did they even read the guidelines? Because everything they've asked for, we don't fund. As a government granting agency, we're under very strict what's the word, not guidelines, but we have very strict rules about how we evaluate and award grants. If something is not fundable, no matter how good your proposal is, we cannot fund it, because we have to be fair and equitable to everybody who applies. So if we say we don't fund digitization, and someone writes this great digitization proposal, and we go, oh, it's so great, we're going to fund it. We can't do that, because we didn't open it up to everyone else to apply for this. So we have to really follow those things strictly. Find out our staff, can you put staff wages in? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Some people will fund equipment or certain types, others won't. So you want to be very, very clear about that. And don't ask for something that's clearly not fundable. Because even if they fund your grant, they may zero that out, and that may make it hard for you if you don't have that money to back it up to actually do the project. I would say if there's, sometimes for my folks, they will attach, another thing is to attach to your project is if you have the bids, you want to attach the bids from your vendors, we ask for them to be attached. We ask for you to attach all of them and then tell us who you chose and why. Again, we don't make you choose, we don't in our program, the lowest bid. Again, you might want to ask that of the funder. We like to see the treatment proposals from the conservators. We want to see everybody who's involved in the project's resume, whether they're on staff or someone that you're hiring, or a job description. So if you're using a consultant, we want to see their resume. We want to make sure these people are qualified to do the job. I don't want to see, say, a general archivist who's going to come in with no preservation experience and do a preservation survey. I want to see a preservation, either a conservator or a preservation librarian who's going to do that. So those are the kinds of things we're looking for, and I think they're really useful if you can attach those. We also, in where I work, we fund a public library construction program, and we like pictures of really rundown libraries, and then we like the brand new ones. Or people send us pictures afterwards of their solar panel fields, which are bizarre but fun to look at. So anything that you think will strengthen that, provide that detailed information. And a lot of grantors, they may have a word limit for the narrative, but they don't have limits for your appendices. So that's a way sometimes to get in a little bit of extra information. We also ask, in ours, we want to see that what your preservation activities are, and we want you to have a disaster plan written. So I often ask people just to send me like the table of contents of their disaster plan as an attachment. So look at what they're asking you for, and if there's a way that you can show that instead of just saying it, I think that's very helpful. Oh, the format of images, is that what you're asking me? I'm not quite sure. We take TIFF and JPEG images for ours. Again, you want to make sure that if you're sending it in a paper format, then you can send in real photographs or just printouts from your computer. We do want them done electronically. You'd really want to make sure that the funder can open them. That's the main thing. Our online application is very clear about what formats we accept. If it's not clear, definitely give them a call or send them an email and ask that. A lot of funders will also have an FAQ page, and some of those questions you may find answered there. But you definitely do want to find that out and not send them something that can't be opened. And then you want to find out, is there a match or a cost share, and what things are allowable under that match or cost share. For a lot of folks, you may already have, if there's a federal grant and you have a cost share, you may have some sort of federally negotiated percentage that you can use, or you maybe not. In my program, because we have a lot of small organizations who don't even have paid staff, we look at hours sometimes of how many hours they're going to contribute. And again, but we do have some minimum that we require. So you want to make sure you know what those are and what things are allowable. Where I work, because my salary is paid out of LSTA funds, and when we apply if we apply for an ILMLS grant, my time can't be cost shared in because the feds are already paying for it, and that would be sort of double dipping. So you also want to have those things aware, and that's where hopefully someone in your institution, if you're big enough, can kind of help you through some of those institutional things. Helping you, what's my federal ID number, what's our DUNS number, somebody can, hopefully at your institution is helping with you with that. So you want to know that as you go through so that you can make sure that you're meeting that or exceeding it. So then you're writing the proposal, and you want to sort of introduce yourself. Who are you, and what is your mission? What do you collect? Don't assume that people know who you are and what you do, especially if you're applying to a national or a large foundation. there are thousands. If you've looked at the Health Heritage Index, you know how many institutions there are out there. And most people may have never heard of you, or even if they've heard of you, they really don't know maybe a whole lot about you. Putting in a link to your website is great. It allows people to come in and very easily then hopefully they can click, the reviewers and the grantors can just click on that link and be connected to your website, um, or or at least type it in, but it allows them to go there and kind of see what it is that you're all about. And that's really fun for me as a funder sometimes. I find out about topics I've never heard of, but are actually very, very interesting. So talk about that. You know, are you a museum, an art museum, and you have a collection of an archive about the artists that you have there? You know, what are you local history? Whatever it is that you collect, and what is your mission? Again, state your need here in the beginning in very clear terms. We have a large collection of photographs that are glass plates and are endangered. Talk a little bit, and we want to preserve those by reformatting them. You want to demonstrate they're a responsible, well-run organization. Again, a nice website helps with that. You want to usually talk about, usually people are asking maybe a little bit about the size of your institution, your budget, your number of staff, how long you've been around. They may ask for samples of your mission statement or collection policy, so you want to make sure you have those all ready, and that's what you'll have been doing when you were sort of planning the project, making sure you have all this stuff. If you don't, then maybe you're not ready to apply. And you want to demonstrate that your collections are important. Don't assume that people know about your collections again. I had one proposal that came in once, and I don't want to give details, but let's just say it was about a sport, polo. Let's say polo, you know, because I know nothing about polo except you play it on a horse and you hit a ball, right? And they had a museum they had created for a polo player, and they kept talking about how this person was the greatest polo player ever. I'd never heard of them. And so how would I know? They didn't show me that how this person was important. And why would we need a museum for one person? I could go online maybe and see that there are 5 polo museums in the United States. So why should we be helping to support such a narrowly focused collection? And at no point did they ever really make the case of why this person was important. They kept saying they were important, but they didn't show it. So you have to do that. You really have to do that. And you can, and I know in our proposals, you know, talk about who uses your collections and why and how much use they get. It can be people who walk through your door or people who come into your door electronically. But talk about that. Demonstrate and I use the word demonstrate a lot here because, again, we're getting to that outcome-based evaluation kind of thing. You need to show it. You really need to give examples. So talk about the long-term effects of this project. If we do this project, what will be the results? These collections will be preserved? Great. Will they be more accessible? Will people know about them? Will they be stop the deterioration? Will we be also creating a finding aid that's going to be up on our website or that we're putting into a national database? Tell us about that so that maybe they've never been accessible before because of their collection. Now they will be. So you really want to start to get into, again, keep with the details here. And then you want to keep asking yourselves these questions as you go through. Do we have a clear goal? Is it clear all the way through? Is each section of our application sort of building, you know, on to making our case? Is your budget realistic? You can't just throw money in there. Oh dear. You can't just throw in money and say, well, and then down the road we're going to do this. Most people want to see that the project begins and ends during this grant period. And is it realistic? Don't start inflating people's salaries or saying our project manager is going to spend 50% of her time on this project when the reviewers are often experienced. So they're going to say this project doesn't take 50% of someone's time. It's going to take 15% of their time. And they're going to know that. So they're going to probably, you know, that'll be a mark against you or you'll get a lower score. Is your timeline realistic? Don't try to solve all of your preservation problems in one grant proposal. I've seen people try to do this. If you've never applied for a grant before, starting with a survey is easy. It's not a lot of staff time. It doesn't take a lot of time. And it gives you a sense, it starts to give you a sense of what you're going to do. Most grantors will let you come back another year. So you got a grant one year, and then you can come back the next year to do something else. So maybe the first year you ask for a survey. Maybe the second year you're asking to rehouse a specific manuscript collection. The second year you're having a survey of your photograph collection. The next year on and on. If you have a plan, and you can just slowly work through that plan in chewable bites, so that you're not trying to rehouse this collection and reformat another collection, and oh, by the way, we're going to upgrade our HVAC this year. That's just crazy. You're going to set yourself up for failure, and probably the grantor and the reviewers aren't going to believe that you can get all that done. And the other thing is, I know it happens with the feds and with us, we don't always get to stick to the timeline that we want. We have our delays. Of course, now the federal government shut down, so they're delayed. So they may have planned to give you an award notice in January, and it turns out it's not till March, but guess what? You have to do it in the same amount of time. You don't get an extra 3 months to do your project. So think about that, too. Try to find out the history of how these work so that you have a sense of, oh, I've only got 1 year, or really it's 9 months, or it was supposed to be a 2-year grant, but now I've only got a year and a half. Can I get the project done? So really, really look at every step of the way. Sometimes people, if they're doing a rehousing project and they haven't done it before, they just have staff do it for a little bit and they time them. If you're working with a vendor, make sure you have a schedule. If you're sending things out for shipments, make sure that's all settled ahead of time. How many shipments, how long it'll be at the vendor. When it comes back, what do you need to do? What is your role? Then when it comes back, do you have to inspect it? Are you doing more cataloging? Make sure you've identified all those steps, and you've hopefully sort of got a sense of the timeline of what you can do. Because you don't want to find yourself at the end unable to finish the project. Sometimes folks can give extensions, sometimes we can't. So don't assume you're going to get an extension. The other thing is, if you run into a problem when you do get your grant, make sure you communicate with the grantor. And then, again, is our need and our story compelling? Make sure that you're really making the case again. Why is this important? Why is there a preservation need? Why is it important to the cultural community or to researchers or scholars? All of those things you kind of want to touch on. Okay, I love this question. Your future of this first, when the future depends. That's a good question from Ronnie. It depends on whether or not they fund staffing. For my program, we don't fund staffing. You don't want to sound like too pathetic, because the question then comes up, well, how viable is this organization if they can't continue without this grant? That's really important, you're walking sort of a tightrope there, where you're saying, we need this money to do all these great things, but if we don't get it, we're going to fold. That's kind of a tough one then. You might want to say, these are some of the new initiatives that we want to do. So let's say we're going to focus on that, what you've done, what you can continue to do, maybe some new initiatives. I'm looking at Lori's answer now for Hugo's question. It depends, really. I think, the question about can you bring the money, get conservation treatment from abroad? Now, in the United States, we would say no, because we have plenty of professionals to do the work here. I'm not familiar with Bolivia, so I don't know. If that's the case, you may have to do that. Again, something to ask your vendor, and looking at the cost of all of that. I know for my program, we do fund travel costs, but we are expecting people to use vendors within the northeast part of the United States. So that would definitely be something you'd have to ask the program. I agree with Lori on that one. Okay. So Then we're getting towards the end here. You're writing your proposal, and um, um, I would say the one important thing to do is have someone proofread it. Look for typos. Does it make sense? Does it flow? Again, is the person reading for you, are they ready to write you a check? Um, if you've been working and writing, we've all had this experience. Whatever you're writing, you're working on it, you're working on it. After a while, you can't even read it. You are seeing what is in your head. Um, so get someone, a friend, a significant other, someone who's totally, like outside of your organization even, to read the proposal. And they can say to you, I don't know what, I mean, they may not say, I don't understand the technical part, but they may say, I really don't understand what you're talking about. Um, so make sure that you've done that. If you've been doing a lot of cutting and pasting and copying, make sure that you copied everything you wanted to. You didn't. I've had read proposals where suddenly a sentence is cut off because they were obviously cutting and pasting and just didn't quite highlight the whole thing. We've all done that. Um, so there's lots of little technical things like that. Even if you have spell check, you can't always, we all have that where there's two spellings of a word and you've got the wrong one down there. Okay, I'm seeing Lori's answer about brick and mortar. Yeah. So you need to do, you want to make sure that it's just sort of all there. Every piece is there. Some applications like ours, if you're missing certain things, when you try to submit, you'll get an error message back. Not all of them do that. If you have a grants office, they're usually really helpful with that as well. So you want to make sure that it's all there, it's all complete, and it makes sense. I've read lots of proposals where, people obviously know their collection, they feel very passionate about it, but they haven't quite conveyed that. And they'll say that to me. They'll say, well, they'll look at the reviewer's comments and they'll say, well, I said that. Well, did you say it in the section you were supposed to? Or maybe you thought you said it, but obviously you didn't communicate it. And there's a big difference there. So you want to make sure that you've done that. And I think having someone outside really is helpful. So if you get your grant, what do you need to do then? And this is just something I wanted to put in here because I think it's a really important part of writing grant proposals is understanding grants management. When I took over my program, we had a lot of problems with this, and I started to look at the documentation we were sending people and realized it wasn't very clear, and spent some time just reorganizing that, clarifying it, and that helped a lot. I think most people's inclination is to open up the email or the letter and see if it's a yes or a no. And I used to tell people it's sort of like applying for colleges. There's a lot of emotion at that point, and you say, "Yeah, we got our grant," or "Oh God, no, we didn't," and that's great. You have those emotions. That's normal, but you want to celebrate and then go back and read everything that the grantor just sent you. Make sure you understand what kind of documentation you're going to have to keep, what kind of reports. Some grantors want interim reports throughout the project. Some just want a final report. They will want certain information in that report. Make sure you're keeping that information so that you have it at the end of your grant period. Understand when you're going to receive payments. Some grantors give you 100% up front. Some of them dole out the money throughout the time period. So you may have to front some money in order to actually start your project. And most folks will make you do something like that. They will do that because they want to see that you're actually doing the project. Now, if you do have problems during the grant, make sure that you handle those problems and or any delays. For example, you may have applied for a grant, and 6 months later you found out you get this letter saying we gave you a grant. Maybe you're new, and the person who applied for it left, and this is news to you, and you're having a stroke at this point. First of all, try to find out if they kept a folder about it. If not, be honest with the grantor. Call them up and say, I don't know what this is about. Can you send me a copy of the application that we sent you? Not a great start, but at least it's honest and you're up front. If at any time during the project you can't do something that you said you were going to do, be sure to let them know right away. You may have a vendor who goes out of business. We've had people call me and say, my consultant passed away. You know, things happen. It's okay. It's how you handle it that's important. So the important thing is that you're honest with your grantor and that you have a plan for handling those problems or delays. You may need an extension. You can ask for one. You may get it. You may not. It really depends on who's giving you the money and what the rules are for that grant program. I've had people call up and say, we applied for it. We're so happy we got it, but we're so sorry. Our director quit, and we have nobody here to do it. We're going to have to decline. Do that right away. Don't just go, oh, gee, I need to do that. Because in my case, I can give that money to somebody else and use it. And I at least know that you're a responsible organization, because if you're planning to come back again next year, then I won't be going, oh, those are those people we gave a grant to, and then they didn't tell me till 6 months in they weren't going to do it. Are they going to do that to me again? Because part of the grants management, of course, is to make sure you get your great project done, that you get your funding for it, but also chances are you may want to go back again, and you may want to apply for another grant from them the next round, and you want to have a good track record with them. So if you've done all the things I've suggested, like read the guidelines, go to their website, talk to them, and then manage your grant honestly and professionally, you're going to be in a pretty good place. You want to just make sure that you do all of that and handle it. If your budget has to change in any way, you definitely, or your staffing, who's doing anything, you definitely want to let the grantor know that. It may be okay with them. It may not be. Don't assume. You can make changes. You may file your final report, and they'll say, this is not acceptable to us. I mean, I've had people, again, say, well, we started out with one project. They decided for some reason not to do it. They want to do a completely different project. I can't allow that. That's not what you were evaluated on. And you were evaluated on against all these other applicants. So you want to be able to, it's not fair then to switch your project. You weren't evaluated. Your award wasn't based on that. So that would not be acceptable, I think, to most people. If you have a grant, you're probably going, or you may have them come and want to do a site visit at some point during the grant project or right at the end of it, especially if you've had several of them. This really is sort of an inspection, and you can talk to the person who's coming to visit you ahead of time about, they'll usually contact you and say, I'd like to make a site visit, and they're looking for a time and date. It's perfectly acceptable to ask lots of questions about what they expect to happen during the site visit so that you can be prepared. I've been on both ends of this. I do site visits for our grant program, and we get site visits from, for example, IMLS comes in. And they're all different. Depending on your project, the site visit might be slightly differently. But I know when I visit, I want to meet the staff who worked on the project. I want to see the collections that were treated or were part of the project. I want to see the area in which the collections are stored, and the area in which staff are working, and the area in which the public may be accessing these collections. So I want to see all of that. And I'm really assessing you then, because I know that maybe you will be applying again. So, it's kind of like you're having company for the day. You're going to clean the house. You're going to make things tidy. You're going to have staff ready who can answer the questions that might be asked about the project. You could talk about any problems that you had or things that worked particularly well for you. And then it's also a chance for you to turn it in sort of an opportunity and show them other collections that you're thinking of preserving. and talk about future proposals. This is a chance for them to see your collections and really get a chance to see what your needs are. So you can talk about that, and you can show them the collections. Really, really helpful. Really, and I find it's my favorite part of my job as a grants manager is site visits. I love meeting the staff. We all put faces to names. I find that people are often, are much more honest in person than they would be writing in a proposal. So I really like that part of it. I get to see parts of institutions that no one else sees, and I see these fantastic collections, and I hear about really great work that people are doing, and it makes me feel like what I'm doing is worthwhile and helping people. So it goes both ways, and I think it's something that you can really turn to your advantage, or you could really hurt yourself if you're not organized. Your place is messy, or your staff can't answer questions or complain about the project. Those are not things you really want to do when you have a site visit. There's a question here about an example of very well-written collection descriptions. We have on our website, which is www.nysl.gov. Maybe Lawyer, somebody can post that up for you. My program website, we have a sort of a guidebook that has good and bad examples of language for each section of our application, and you can look at that. And again, if you, it's up there full text, I think in a PDF format and maybe HTML. And you can look at that. It's on the Conservation Preservation pull-down page. So if someone could put that up, that would be great. Again, site visits are something you should be expecting. And find out what level of staff. Do they want to meet with your finance people? Do they want to meet with the curators? Whatever type of project they may want to meet with different folks. Find out how long they're going to be there. All of that kind of stuff so that you can make sure you have time for everything that you want to do. If there's something specific you want them to see, let them know ahead of time if that's going to take longer, just so there are no surprises and everyone's aware of what's going to happen that day. And then if you get turned down, I like to talk about this because, again, this is can be very sort of feel very personal, be a very emotional thing. Years ago, I did a panel at a conference, and I was there talking about the program, and then I had two people who'd applied, one who got turned down and one who was successful, and it was really, really interesting for me as well. But we talked about what that's like to get turned down and what to do about that. So most grantors will give you some feedback about what the reviewers or panelists had to say, either how you scored on each section and comments. We make those automatically available for our folks. If they don't, just ask for them. They are very, very valuable, I think. It gives you a sense of, where did we fail? Sometimes they'll tell you where you fell. Like we have sort of a ranking, and then we just go through and spend money. And maybe they were able to fund, say they got 60 applications and they were able to fund 30 and you found out you were 31. I always say, I don't know if that hurts more or makes you feel better, but you want to get a sense of where you fell in the award system, sort of. Where did you not succeed in your application? Did they not, were they not convinced of the value of your collection? Did they not like your plan of work? Did you leave something out? Did you think you said something and you didn't? This is, I think, a chance. And sometimes it's really simple things that you've maybe forgot to do or didn't communicate, but overall they really liked your proposal, so you feel like, okay, we have a chance. Let's call the grantor and talk about reapplying the next round. What do we need to do? And they're often willing to do that with you. Sometimes we can, depending on the kinds of questions you ask, we can help you or not. But get a sense of, is this really worth our applying again? If they absolutely hated your collection or hated your project, then maybe no. I mean, we applied for a grant recently, and we knew it was kind of a unusual project we wanted to do, and it got turned down. And we weren't surprised, and we had a discussion. We knew what kind of proposal we could write that would get funded, and we decided we didn't want to do that. Again, it was that whole question of we didn't want to just apply for the sake of funding. We really wanted to do something we felt would be useful. So we made the decision not to apply. We didn't want to do the other kind of proposal. So that's the kind of thing that you kind of want to do. And submitting early influenced acceptance. No, not for my program. It does not. And we aren't able to accept drafts. I know in past some organizations will take a draft and give you comments back. I used to do that. I'm not allowed to do that anymore, but some folks might do that. A good question to ask the grantor is, can you do that? For my program, there's a due date, a time. It's 5 p.m. on a certain date. Because we're online, at 5:01, you're locked out, and you cannot submit at that point. So that's kind of nice for me because when they came in paper format, it was tough. We received them by a certain day, but we had problems a couple times with some of the carriers. So this is really crystal clear. I would suggest planning on having it done ahead of the deadline, just in case something goes wrong, either with your computer system or turns out somebody's on vacation who can't sign off on it. But you definitely want to give yourself a little extra time there. I've had people call me the day before grants are due and want the application to start writing it, and they're going to write it overnight. I think they're nuts, but who am I to tell them no? If you're going to be getting consultant bids or vendors bids, you definitely want to start, way ahead of time as soon as you know about the grant application, because you want to make sure that they have enough time to write up their bid. It may require that you take your collections to a conservator or have them come to you, and you want time to schedule that. You may have to your vendor may ask you a bunch of questions that you weren't anticipating, that you have to go back to your collection and start doing some counting. So you really want to make sure that you give yourself plenty of time when writing the proposal to get all of that ready to go. And then I would say once you know that you have the grant, at that time, make sure that you let your consultants and your vendors know that you got the grant and you're planning on using them, and discuss a timeline, even though you already have a timeline in place. Just confirm all of that. I used to get a lot of calls, and Lori will confirm this, I think, from her years of working at NADCC, is that we would give people their award notice in July, and they sometimes wouldn't bother to call the vendor till January, because that's when they were ready to start sending the stuff to the vendor. And the vendor had thought they didn't get the grant or they didn't choose them, and they don't have room in their schedule to do the project before the end of the grant period. And now they're scrambling for a new vendor or consultant. So you definitely want to let them know right away, hey, we got our grant, good news, and we want to use you. We talked about this timeline before. The grant award was a little late. We're going to have to adjust it, or how does this fit in? Can you still do the project? Can we still stick with this timeline? Just get all of that confirmed again. Make sure everybody in your institution knows you got the grant and knows their role. You may have had some staff changes since you wrote the proposal, and you have new people on and they don't know about this. Make sure that your funding folks know about this, your financial folks. They'll probably need to set up a separate account for this grant proposal to manage the money out. So you want to make sure you have all of that in place. Okay, and I think then you get to start all over again. You've done your project, you did a great job, you filed your annual report on time, you've got your money, and now you can decide we want to do it again. We had such a great time. I'm joking there. So, now you've got all of this experience, and you have a much better sense of what you can accomplish. So you might decide, oh, we can do a little bit more, or God, that about killed us, we need to do less. You really have a sense of that. Make sure that when you're doing all this, you keep lots of notes and you keep copies of the application. We allow in our online program, if you've applied a previous year, you can go into the old one and copy and paste text from the old one into the new one. We know people do that, so why not just make it easier for you? There's a lot of background information that may be in there. However, if you're applying for a grant that got turned down the year before, make sure you go back to your vendors and consultants and make sure those bids and the prices still hold. You don't want to find out they've raised your prices. Okay, I'm being asked to clarify the difference between getting a survey and getting an assessment. An assessment, and I'm not an archivist, so, but an assessment is often just looking at what is it you have in your collection, how many, what they're about, more about the cataloging and intellectual control. A preservation survey is focusing very specifically on the preservation issues with your collection. And it's also not an inventory. Some folks think they're also going to get an inventory and find out what they have. They don't do that. A general preservation survey is not an item level survey either. So a needs assessment will touch on preservation issues, but it will give a lot more attention to the arrangement and description of the collection and any finding aids and things like that, inventories. So it'll have more of that in there than just whereas preservation will not, they'll not pay as much attention to that. They'll really focus almost 90% on preservation issues. I hope that's clear. It's something we talk about a lot, I think, in the preservation community, these sort of terminologies between the museum, the archives, and the library communities. We have lots of different sort of terminologies that we use, and sometimes we use the same words to mean different things. Is there, or was it? I would, if there's not a website for the foundation, I would call them. I would call them first, and I would also look and just Google them and see what other things you can find out about the organization. You may find out a little bit about the background of it from a newspaper article or something like that. But I would definitely make a phone call first. I sometimes get letters from folks. Because I'm a grantor state, I don't tend to get a lot of those. But I do respond to them when I get them. I mainly get emails. And if there's an email address, I would say that's a good place to start too, is just send an email, introduce yourself and your organization, and ask a couple questions, talk about who you are and why you're contacting them. And hopefully they'll get back to you pretty quickly and let you know if that's the kind of, you know, if you're anything they're interested in, I guess. Is there a downside to submitting a grant application early? Most institutions, if it's an online one, they don't open it up before a certain date, so you have a time period in which you can submit. So they may give, we try to give at least 8 weeks, hopefully 3 months is really my goal, to have it open to people. Frankly, I don't even look at them till the deadline. So it doesn't matter, because what I'm doing, the day after the grant is due, I'm sitting down and I've asked folks, I think you saw, give like a summary description, and I'm assigning reviewers to the grants to start the review process. So that's what I'm doing at that point, and I'm not going to start doing that till all of them are in, and I know exactly how many applications I have and what the subject areas are. Because we fund all kinds of preservation, you know, I'm looking to match my proposals up with people with expertise in that area of preservation. So I'm not going to look at those till I have them all in. And during that period when you're applying, I'm usually going to my reviewers and saying, okay, who wants to review this year? How many can you do? Blah, 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 things like that. And so that's when I'm ready to go. And I'm going to do it all within, you know, maybe 2 days. I'm going to just focus on getting that done. And then I'm going to start reading them. I have a deadline for the reviews to come into me. And then I sit down. In my case, we get a score order list. I sit down and I start reading through all the reviewers' comments and looking what people had to say, and making sure that they're good comments and that I understand any of their questions, if there's any red flags that they raise that I missed, that sort of thing, so that when you get them, you understand them too. I used to have to type them all up. It was quite a chore. I'm very happy that we're online now, but that's what I do. And I think I don't know if that's what everyone else does. I know when I did NEH panels, the reviewers got them, and then we got, as a panelist, I got the reviewers' sheets and comments as well, and then I did it, and then we met. So it was a little different format. Usually, I think most grantors will give you some idea of what their process is. So my reviewers look at electronic copies. They don't look at paper copies. We used to have to get 5 copies of every grant proposal, and then we had to put together these huge packets and mail them out. It was a lot of work. For determining budgets for technology or travel, get bids. It's hard with travel sometimes if they're flying because the airlines are so up and down, and it can change. But get a sense of, what the average costs are, and then kind of go from there. Again, look at the hotels in your area. Sometimes the consultant will tell you that. They'll tell you how long they're going to be, how many nights, and they'll give you a price. So you're not actually having to figure that out. And they may say, my travel costs are going to be $500. That's what you owe them. If their travel costs end up being $700, you don't owe them that money probably then. So it's not really what you have to deal with. If grants are not online, you need to ask how they're submitted. We don't accept them to be emailed at all because it would probably crash my email system. I've had people ask me if they could fax them years ago. We never accepted faxes, again, for the same reason. Our fax machine would probably crash because, most people submit at the last minute. When we used to accept paper, I've had people drive to Albany to hand deliver them, quite a distance sometimes. But that's what they were doing. They were finishing it up all night, and they got up in the morning and drove. Got to me by 5 o'clock, so they made it. Again, it's really something you want to ask the grantor. If it's not online, how early is too early? I think if you can get your grant proposal in at least a week or two before they're due is a great idea, just in case something goes wrong. One year we had, it was, I think it was right after 9/11 with all the anthrax. It was right at my due date. And we had this, big rule, no late applications. But I had people calling me in panic. They had taken their applications to, say, the post office or the FedEx office, and then they closed down and they couldn't get it back. In that case, we did have to take late applications that year, and we actually had something from our governor that said we could. But you never know with something, now we have a strike, or not a strike, a shutdown. So I don't know, are we getting mail today? I don't really know. I haven't checked my mailbox. So is that an issue, suddenly? If something like that happens, I would definitely call the grantor if they're there and say, we can't do this. If they're not there because they're in a shutdown, then probably chances are they're going to make some accommodations. Too early, I would say I've never heard of anyone putting their proposal in too early. I know we certainly make an effort when they start to come in to create, when they were coming in paper, to have one specific spot that we knew where they all went, and started to get them together so we didn't lose them. In our online system, I think you get a message back that says that we've received it. If you're looking for something like that, you might want to send it where you get the postcard back so that you know that they received it. You have something in writing that says, was that certified mail, that says, yes, they received it, or something from FedEx that says that, so you have a backup in case there's a problem. I would definitely look into something like that, so you have documentation that you sent it and you sent it on time.
Barbara, I'm just going to interject here for just a second. So if everyone wants to continue asking questions, we still have about 11 minutes, so feel free to keep typing them um, while Barbara's here. And while you guys are thinking of questions for Barbara, I'm going to go ahead and pull over the link to the homework assignment. And then also I'm going to pull over our link for our group login. Again, this is just if you've signed in and you're watching with a bunch of people, and so all those people you're watching with haven't entered their first and last name. Whoever signed in, go ahead and enter those folks. We do like to get an accurate idea of our attendance, and we can't do that if you didn't sign in. But if you did sign in, we've got your name, and there's no need to use this chat box at all.
Can I type in my website in here somewhere?
Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
Where would I do that?
Over in the left-hand side in that chat box, and we'll also post that on the course webpage.
Okay.
Let's see.
I'm not sure how. Did I click on this little box? Hide sidebar. Oh, I don't want to do that. Did I just start typing in it? Oh, I see down here. Okay, I gotcha. I'll type in my website page. It is. It's because it's sort of buried in our website, so I think that would be useful.
And Lori has pointed out to me that we have made the deadline for our homework October 14th, which is Columbus Day and the Canadian Thanksgiving. So just email us if you don't think you'll be able to make that deadline. We're happy to extend it just one more day to the 15th. But email us to let us know.
Okay.
And Barbara, let's see, we have a question from Krista, and looks like you've got the web link in there.
Yeah, I sent the web link, I hope. Ours, first-time proposals, I would say that's a tough question to answer. I would say the majority of them are successful. I would say for my program, about half of them do get funded, but I've never looked at it from that way. I have found that people who come to our grant writing workshops and call me have much more successful proposals than the folks I've never, ever heard from. And I always get one or two where I absolutely think that they never read the guidelines. But I have to say that we have sort of a mailbox for the program where people ask questions, and then I post most of the questions and answers on our FAQ page. And folks who do all of those things, I think, are much more successful than the ones who just sort of do it on their own without even contacting the program.
And Barbara, let me ask this question because it came up in another webinar. Someone was curious, they have a program or a project in mind. Can you apply for multiple grants? And what happens if you're awarded, if you're so lucky to be awarded more than one?
My program, we only allow one application per institution, and so we don't allow that. And if I do get two, well, I don't think they could do it in our online system. What I did before, I think, is that I would call them and say, which one do you actually want to submit? Other institutions do allow multiple applications. So again, it's something you want to ask, I think, does the grantor allow that, and how do they handle it? We don't, just because we're a small program and we don't want, I have very large organizations and very small ones, and if I allowed multiple, I think the really big organizations would end up eating up all the money. The other thing I didn't mention is, you really need to find out what's the maximum grant award amount and the minimum award amount when you're planning your project, and don't ask for more than the maximum, no matter how great you think it is, because there's probably, they have, again, these rules, and they have to follow them. So if they say the maximum award is $100,000, don't ask for $150,000. Stick with what they're saying you can ask for.
Okay, and Cindy has a great question. She met you earlier at WNYLRC session in Buffalo a few weeks ago.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And they're seeking conservation materials for their historical class montages. Since their alumni are very happy that we're hanging their class photos, the grantor questioned why they're also seeking funds from the alumni.
Oh, so would Would we ask that question? No, I wouldn't ask that. I mean, sometimes folks will talk about, they may be combining our grant and saying, well, we also have another grant, or we're hoping to get another grant, but if we don't get it, this is our backup plan, and you can certainly say that. But I'm not going to second guess you on that, and I don't think most reviewers would second guess you on that. Another question was whether it's better to call our project or create an email. I like people to start with an email and make sure you include all your contact information. And if I feel like I can answer the questions adequately in an email, I will. If not, I'll give the person a call or email them back and say, let's set up a time to discuss. It just depends. And some of the questions are very easy, factual kind of things. Sometimes it's needs more of a discussion. So I like for me, I find email is the best way to get started with folks, and it also gives me sort of time to really look at it and think about my answer. Whereas if someone catches me sometimes right when I'm trying to do something else, I'm maybe not giving them 100% of my attention. So I like the emails first.
And Barbara, just a quick question. You have a project. What are the guidelines for applying to more than one organization? Would you recommend pinpointing just one organization to apply for that fits best with that project, or can people apply to multiple organizations for grant funding?
I would say that's a no-no unless you're asking for a different part of the project. So, because what if two of them fund you? Then what are you going to do? So I would say no, don't do that. If, however, you were applying for one funder for the preservation part and another one to maybe help pay for cataloging, that's okay if they're different parts. And I have had people do that. They'll come to me for the preservation part, and then they'll be going to someone else for, say, to pay to digitize it after the collection's been preserved. And I think that's great because it's making the collection even more accessible and cutting down on handling of the collection. But it has to be preserved before it can actually be digitized. That's fine. It's obviously you can't guarantee it, but if that's what you're going for, or you already know you have that part of it, it's great, not a problem, but not for the same thing.
Okay, and Laura also had a question. Let's see, Barbara, do you find that grant applications asking for the maximum amount of funding get put on the back burner for other grant proposals that are asking for less?
I'm assuming that's from a point of view of reviewing them. No, it makes absolutely no difference to us. What we're looking for is a good proposal, a good project, well planned. We have a lot of folks coming in for, say, surveys, which are not expensive projects to do. And because we encourage people to start with surveys, we definitely try to, and these are people who are often very new to preservation, we do like to try to fund those if we can. And sometimes those are just $3,000 that people are asking for. So it doesn't matter the amount.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And then Marcia had a question. Let me say we only have about a couple minutes left, so this will be our last question. Make sure to join us for our final webinar for this course, which is Monday, October 7th at 2 o'clock. You'll log in the same exact way. So, Barbara, your last question, and I'm finding it hard to believe that this is your first webinar.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's been fun. You guys have been so nice to me.
So, Marcia,
okay.
So you see the question there from Marcia?
I see the question.
Okay, great.
We do fund preservation training in our program. Unfortunately, it's only for New York State, so you'd have to move here in your institution here. We do fund that. We've really, the one thing we don't like to fund is learning by doing projects where you hire someone to come and train your staff. I don't feel like that's a really good use of funding, but we have library councils in the state of New York, and they will often apply on behalf of their region. We've had our museum association apply for grants to do webinars. What we have, and I think you saw that, is a different sort of application for education proposals because we're looking for, why are you doing, why do you need this training and who do you think is going to come? Do you have some commitment? How are you going to let people know? What's it going to cost? Sort of what's the curricula for the class? Is there a charge for folks? That kind of thing. We're, again, looking for a lot of details. well planned out. I know that in the past other federal funders and some of the foundations have funded similar types of education projects. I think now it's a little harder maybe because of the internet and things like webinars where you don't have to do all of these things locally, that there's so much out there that you'd really probably need to show why you need people to be on site. And there certainly are lots of cases where you really do want to be on site with folks and doing training, for example, disaster response, or helping people to do some sort of hands-on project. But we used to fund research projects. We have funded research projects and educational projects, products, and now we expect a lot of that stuff to be electronically available as well. So you would really want to talk about how you were going to handle that, and again, talk to the grantor. But I personally think that preservation education will never end. It'll always go on in one format or the other, and it's just something we all have to make a commitment to keep doing. I had a state librarian ask me once when I first took my job, well, we had all these disaster workshops, years ago. Why do we need to keep funding them? And I said, because there are always new people. People retire, there are new staff, people change jobs, and it never ends. So, but you do really want to be able to justify the need for that.
All right, Barbara. Thank you so much.
I'm so talked out.
It was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you
for everyone for coming in, and I hope you all learned something today.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you on Monday. Have a great afternoon.